Mark sat at the kitchen table, flipping through a newspaper he wasn't really reading. The morning light streamed in through the window, highlighting the steam curling from his cup of black coffee. Across from him, Linda scrolled through her phone, her face blank, her mind somewhere far away. It had been like this for a while, quiet, distant, polite. After nearly 30 years of marriage, they had mastered the art of coexisting without truly being together. They weren't angry. They weren't fighting. They weren't in love either. They were just there. The day unfolded like every other. Mark left for work at the small accounting firm he had been with for 2 decades. Linda, a retired nurse, spent her time tending to the garden, volunteering at the library, and meeting her friend, Susan, for coffee. By the time Mark got home, dinner was on the table. They ate in near silence, filling the gaps with predictable questions. How was work? Fine. Busy. Anything new at the library? Not really. It wasn't like this before. Mark remembered how they used to talk for hours about their dreams, their frustrations, their silly little observations about life. But now, every conversation felt like checking a box, like something they did, because that's what married couples were supposed to do. One night, as Mark lay in bed staring at the ceiling, he realized he couldn't remember the last time Linda had laughed at something he said, or the last time he had tried to make her laugh. Their son, Ethan, visited one weekend. At 27, he had a life of his own now, living 2 states away. "Mom, Dad," he said, leaning against the kitchen counter. "Have you guys thought about taking a trip somewhere? Maybe just the 2 of you?" Mark and Linda exchanged glances. "A trip?" Linda asked, her voice uncertain. "Yeah, you guys used to love traveling. Remember that road trip to Colorado when I was a kid?" Ethan smiled. "You were so different back then." Something about the way he said it lingered in the air long after he left. That night, Mark hesitated before speaking. "Do you think we should go somewhere? Just us?" Linda shrugged. "Where would we even go?" That wasn't a no. That was something. A week later, they found themselves in a quiet cabin by the lake, a place they had visited once, years ago. It was Linda's idea. Maybe Ethan had gotten to her too. The first evening they sat by the water, the stillness pressing in on them. Linda sipped her tea, while Mark skipped stones across the surface. "This is nice," she admitted after a while. Mark turned to her, surprised. "Yeah, it is." She looked at him then, really looked at him. His hair was graying, his face lined with years of laughter, stress, and life. And yet, there was something familiar in his eyes, the man she had fallen in love with. "When did we stop trying?" she asked softly. Mark sighed. "I don't know. It just happened, I guess." They sat in silence, but this time it wasn't uncomfortable. The next few days felt different. They went on long walks, reminisced about their early years, and even had a picnic by the lake. Linda told Mark about the books she'd been reading. Mark, in turn, told her about his new coworker who talked too much about golf. One night, as they sat by the fire, Mark hesitated before reaching for her hand. Linda didn't pull away. Instead, she laced her fingers through his, just like she used to. "Remember when we danced in the kitchen?" she asked. Mark chuckled. "You mean back when I still had rhythm?" Linda smiled, standing up. "Let's see if you still do." She pulled him up, and for the first time in years, they swayed together, the crackling fire their only music. And just like that, something shifted. When they returned home, things weren't magically perfect, but they were different. Mark started leaving little notes in Linda's book, silly jokes or reminders of their trip. Linda began making Mark's favorite meals, not out of duty, but because she wanted to. They talked more. They laughed more. One evening, as they sat on the porch, Mark turned to Linda and said, "I don't want us to just be roommates." Linda took a deep breath. "Neither do I." And so they tried, not because they had to, but because they wanted to. One afternoon, while cleaning out an old box in the attic, Linda found a stack of letters tied together with a faded ribbon. She recognized the handwriting immediately, Mark's. Curious, she untied the ribbon and flipped through them. They were love letters written decades ago, back when Mark was away on business trips. Some she remembered receiving. But then, at the bottom of the stack, she found one she had never seen before. It was dated 10 years ago. Her hands trembled as she unfolded it. "Linda, I don't know if you'll ever read this, but lately I felt like we're drifting apart, and I don't know how to fix it. I miss the way we used to talk. I miss the way you used to look at me. I don't know if it's my fault, or if this is just what happens after so many years. But I want us back. I just don't know how to tell you." Linda pressed the letter to her chest, tears welling in her eyes. He had felt it too, long before she had even admitted it to herself. That evening, as they sat together, she took his hand. "I found your letter," she whispered. Mark stiffened. "What letter?" "The one you never sent." Mark's face softened, a bit of embarrassment, a bit of relief. "You should have given it to me," she said. "I was scared," he admitted. She squeezed his hand. "Next time, don't be." After their trip, Linda decided to start a new habit. Every morning she'd leave a small note for Mark before he left for work. Sometimes it was something simple. "Drive safe. I love you." Other times it was something teasing. "Don't forget to pick up the milk, or no dessert for you tonight." Mark, in return, started bringing Linda flowers on random days. Not because it was a special occasion, but because he wanted to. One day Ethan called and noticed something different in their voices. "You guys sound happier," he said, surprised. Mark smiled at Linda from across the room. "We are." One weekend, Linda suggested they visit their old neighborhood, the small apartment where they first lived as newlyweds. It had been over 25 years since they had last been there. As they stood in front of the building, memories came flooding back. "This was where you burned our first dinner," Mark teased. Linda laughed. "And where you tried to fix the sink but flooded the kitchen." They walked down the street past the little cafe where they used to sit for hours, dreaming about the future. Somewhere along the way, they had stopped dreaming. But standing there in the place where it all began, Mark realized something. It wasn't too late to dream again. On their 30th wedding anniversary, Mark surprised Linda with something unexpected, a vow renewal ceremony. It wasn't extravagant, just a few close friends, a quiet dinner, and the two of them standing in their backyard, holding hands. When it was his turn to speak, Mark looked at Linda, his voice steady but full of emotion. "I don't promise you a perfect marriage. I don't promise that we won't still annoy each other or that I won't forget to take out the trash," he said with a small smile. "But I do promise that I will keep trying. I will keep choosing you every day, for as long as I have left." Linda blinked back tears, squeezing his hands. "I'll choose you too," she whispered. As they kissed under the warm glow of the garden lights, it wasn't just a celebration of the past. It was a promise for the future. Mark and Linda's story is a reminder that love doesn't fade because time passes. It fades when we stop paying attention to it. But if two people are willing to try, willing to choose each other again, even after decades together, then love can find its way back home.